Welcome everybody to Week in Review, and I really appreciate the fact you're giving me some time to hopefully give you some perspective, encouragement, and insights about what's happening in our world and what God's calling us to do. You know, here in Tennessee, in the state, our newspaper is called the Tennessean, and yesterday there was a headline, and it was this: tipping point. Tipping point. I believe that we're at a tipping point, and we're hearing some drums of war in the world and in our nation, and also that there's a decisive action that God is calling us to in terms of ditching the Democratic Party. Now, what is a tipping point? A tipping point is really a defining moment. It's a very influential time. It's a time where if it's ignored, and a threshold is just dismissed, there can be severe consequences for humanity. I believe we're at that place. You know, Jesus said concerning the end times and prior to his return, he said, watch and pray. In other words, be discerning, be alert, and then also be involved in intercession. That's what we want to do. And today, I hear drums of war. I don't know if you're understanding it. Rick Joyner, I'm going to have him with me on my podcast, and he has a new book out, and it's revelatory, and it really is on the American war, the Second War. And I remember 4 years ago, I wrote a commentary on we're engaging right now and entering a second civil war. You may not remember, but you know, when this country was founded, you had the loyalists that wanted to stay true to King George in England, and then you had the patriots that said no, and so they had to go to war. And then we had a civil war in this country in the 1800s. Well, now I believe there's another one that is underway, and it's a dangerous time. You know, my friend Mario Morello recently put out a message, a commentary on pastors, and we need to recognize warfare. You can see it also just looking in the globe. You know, China right now, there's drumbeats with them and Taiwan. You know, Taiwan is a democratic republic, but China is an autocratic communistic country. And recently, 77 planes were flying over Taiwan. And the minister there in Taiwan is saying they're on war preparation. And the United Nations leader, he's issued a warning. He said, we are really on a brink of war. He said it's apocalyptic. And you know, you begin to talk about the number of nuclear warheads. And really, when you see the charts, how many, all it can take is a spark and everything can go up and it can happen quickly. You know, my dad was born in Poland. And just from a standpoint of history, how did World War II begin? Well, in 1938, Neville Chamberlain, the prime minister, he met with Hitler. And he came back to England, held up a newspaper. Hey, we have peace in our time. Well, exactly 1 year later, Hitler met with the Soviet Union leader, Stalin, and they signed a non-aggression pact. There was going to be peace. Do you know 1 week later, Poland was invaded, World War II began, and it happened almost like overnight. 90 million people slaughtered, died from casualties, famine, disease, and it happened quickly. We need to be on our toes and be alert. Now, I believe today, God is calling us to be pioneers, not settlers. When I was in a ministry called People of Destiny, our first magazine about 38 years ago was this: are you a pioneer or settler? And it was a call to keep moving and keep step with the Spirit. That's what it tells us in Galatians. You know, we have to keep up with the cloud. Jesus said that man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that continues, that's the actual rendering, to come out of the mouth of God. God is a speaking God. And as the cloud moves, we need to move. If not, there's repercussions. You know, our church is studying the book of Acts right now. And you say, yeah, 120 were in that upper room. But you know, Jesus appeared to over 500. Where were the other 380? And you could see that in history. Jonathan was with David, but you know what? He didn't separate from Saul. And as a result of it, he died, as did Saul. You remember when God healed the Israelites because of serpents in their midst. And they had this, put a snake on the pole. Everyone that looked to it was healed. But then years later, Hezekiah, he had to destroy a pole, like an idol that was made, because it was Nehushtan, just a piece of bronze, but the people kept looking at it instead of moving forward. We need to keep step with the Spirit, and we need to keep going forward. You know, years ago I was in the LA airport, and I remember I was there and I was on this moving sidewalk, and then I noticed my shoe was untied. So I was on the sidewalk, I bent down, and then I tied my shoe. But when I came back up, I had the thought I was just going to kind of pick up with the people that were, you know, right with me moments before, but they were way down the road. They had moved on. God is a God who is moving, and we need to stay in step. Joshua, the people of God, Israel, 11-day journey to get in the promised land, but you know what? A whole generation, their bones bleached in the wilderness. Joshua and Caleb, they had a different spirit. They kept moving, and we need to as well. Just like in Revelation, what does it say? We need to hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. And I believe God is speaking some very clear-cut things to keep moving forward in this generation. Now, what is he saying? Well, I'll tell you this. As we go forward, I believe he's calling us to be pioneers, and it's time for a decision to dump the Democrats. And I mean this sincerely, with no malice in my heart. You know, Joyce Meyer, she said that we need to be careful that we don't allow the devil to have, you know, free reign in our mind and make it a dump. And I think the same thing today. We need to be careful that we don't allow the Democrats and what the progressive left and socialists are trying to do to this country to tear it down and reestablish it as some kind of a socialistic, progressive, secular socialist nation. And you know what? We can't allow them to make a dump of this. You say, well, Larry, what should we do? Well, I want to give you an assignment. Do you remember the TV series and then the movie with Tom Cruise, Mission Impossible? It always started out with something, Mr. Phelps, and it said, here is your assignment or your mission. Will you accept it? And then it went on to say, this tape will self-destruct. I want to give you an assignment from the Lord. I can't cover it all in a brief 10, 12 minutes in this week in review, but I want you to go to, really, Charisma News, just Google the article. I did an article recently, It's Time to Dump the Democratic Party. I gave 3 reasons. What are they? Well, I'd say this. Number 1, the first reason is Biden has failed in his presidency and failed with his agenda, and it's apparent to perceptive people everywhere. Now, I give you the background and all the specifics there, but that's the first reason. By the way, recently, Andrew Yang, who was a presidential candidate, Democrat leader, and ran for mayor of New York, he just recently said, that's it, I'm dumping the Democratic Party. That took some boldness. You know what? He was a lifelong Democrat. There's another reason we need to ditch the Democrat Party, and it's this. They're mortgaging our children's future, pushing socialism over free market capitalism. I want you to read the article. You'll see the specifics on this, but that's the second reason. And then the third reason, and it's a very clear one, I believe it's this, that the Democratic Party is demonstrating and continues to demonstrate a callous disregard for basic human rights and the right to life. They're brazen, they're bold, and they're not relenting. Do you know, years ago in Florence, Italy, 700 some years ago, a man named Dante, he wrote a book about a man that went through a journey of levels of hell. And the levels were, you know, one level was people that gave themselves to violence and others to greed. Other level was to lust and various levels. But you know what the worst level was? Treachery and betrayal and individuals that were betraying us. And you know, he said he wrote that because the politicians in Florence, Italy in his day, they were treacherous. They made promises and they thought they could just get away with anything and there'd be no consequences. Well, I say to you this, and I say it with love. I say it to Mr. Biden, I say it to Kamala Harris, to Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I say it to Democrats that have been leading us down a destructive path. The gig is up. We're not going to be held hostage anymore. And I issue a challenge. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. It's time to recognize the drum rolls and the drums that are beating. It's gravity, it's serious, and it's not a time to be sitting back. It's a time for decisive action. And I believe God is saying it's time to ditch the Dems, pray for them, but move on that we see this nation reestablished on its Judeo-Christian foundations.